Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Objective. And I hope you had a Merry Christmas and are ready to have a Happy New Year. We are going to be talking about perfection. Is it possible? Should it even be desirable? And all of that stuff. Please leave a like and get your super chats sent immediately because we've got a guest that you all love. It's an audience favorite, psychologist. I mean, probably many other things. Gena Gorlin.
Thank you, Rucka. Happy to be here. And yes, happy
Excellent.
holidays, everyone. Merry
That's right.
Christmas, Happy New
Yes.
Year.
We wanted to incorporate, the time and place, the calendar. We wanted to work in the holidays, so at least we got to mention it. We'll see if we find that this topic integrates. Now, well, actually, it does. Christmas is holidays are a challenging time for people in a number of ways. First of all, people who don't have a family are often very depressed. Many of them. People who do have families are very annoyed a lot of the time. So it's a very challenging time. People probably start to contemplate their place in the world, how their life is going, their relationship status, and all these types of things. So, what advice would you give if you had 30 seconds in an elevator with somebody? Okay, you could take a little longer than that, but in brief, somebody's saying, I can't deal with it. Like, I'm so annoyed by my family, or why am I not married? Or like, why all of these things. Why won't my family talk to me? All of these things they're going through.
Sure. I mean, it
Uh,
also, these things come up on birthdays too, right? Like we think of birthdays as this happy celebratory occasion, but we also know that, the lows are as low as the highs are high on those kinds of occasions for all the kinds of reasons you mentioned. What would
yeah,
I say to someone in an elevator? Well, I guess even there, it depends on what sort of misery they're bringing. But if I were to try to put a really general gloss or a kind of overarching perspective on it, I think the first bit would just reflect what you've said, which is that, yeah, this is a hard time for a lot of people, because I think, my husband, Matt, whom I can't help quoting at this point with all of the rich repertoire of tweets he's now released into the world on these topics, but he recently, tweeted that the hardest thing is when you expect life to be easy, right? It's like the greatest hardship. And I think, that also mirrors a lot of what I've observed and worked with and clients, people who struggle, is that a huge chunk of the struggle turns out to be expectation based, that this is supposed to be easy. This holiday is supposed to feel so uniformly celebratory and festive, and the fact that I am not 100% satisfied with my life, the fact that it's not yet perfect, to connect this to our theme, means that something is really deeply wrong, and that that I'm kind of not going about things in the right way, that I should be ashamed. And then there are all of these added secondary emotions, we call them in psychology, jargony speak, right, that get that compound whatever the original source of upset or conflict. And so just realizing, this is already, I know, much longer than this would have to be a pretty tall
yeah. The elevator's
building that
been
we're
broken, and you're waiting for
Empire
the
State.
maintenance guy. But it's a
Thank goodness
miracle.
for that.
Yeah.
It's a
Mhm.
Christmas miracle.
That's right.
The psychologist gets extra time to explicate. Yeah. But that would be part one. And then I think part two would be to kind of inspire a mode of reflection and a mode of, a sort of forward-looking perspective where it's warranted. I think for a lot of us, the holidays are an opportunity to look back, to reflect on what there is to celebrate, right? To just enjoy the abundance, right? And whatever most meaningful connections we have forged in our lives, to kind of pause and reflect on what is going well. But I think that, especially as we approach the new year, I think it's as much an invitation to reflect on intentions, on plans, on goals, values, right? Like, where do we want to go from here? And I think it really depends on where someone happens to be at. Holidays are symbolic, right? They're meant to serve whatever function we need them to serve. psychologically, philosophically, metaphysically, like what is it that we really need to be reminded of? What is it that we need to reaffirm for ourselves? And that's going to be different on different years for different people. And for some of us, it may be the quest for love and the longing for love and being able to experience that longing in the form of an action motive, right? Rather than a weight and a source of misery. So I would try to see what does the person need out of these holidays, and perhaps advise them.
Yeah. These holidays are here for us, but like the calendar is here for us, not the other way around. We're not slaves to the calendar. So yeah, exactly. And get the elevator passengers information and then send them a bill for after that.
I wouldn't have.
But yeah, but I had an acting teacher. I took an acting class when I was living in LA, and before Christmas break, he told the class, like, everyone, that if you're traveling back home, whatever, enjoy that. And he said, some of you, you're gonna have people asking you, like, oh, how's it going being an actor? Like, how's your career? Like, kind of like these Midwestern kind of people, like, oh, I thought you were gonna be a big actor by now. But they're out there in the city where they probably grew up. Like they're working the same job. They're always going to work, but like you're building a network, you're building relationships, you're perfecting, you're improving and maybe perfecting your skill in acting and all of that. You're working towards something, and that's something for you to be proud of and confident in. So it was a very, very nice, memorable moment. Nice. So which brings us to the topic of perfection. And by the way, we've got super chats. Jonathan Honig with $4.99 says, more Gena. And I think he spelled your name wrong. It's with an E, right?
It is, but I do not hold it against anyone who, opts for the correct spelling, because I do realize that my spelling is the unconventional one.
I'm a bit more of a drill sergeant, to borrow an archetype from your article. And Jonathan, if you could please correct that in a future super chat, that would help. Begin to help. Marilyn with $3. Thank you for that. She's blowing us kisses. That's nice. Now, okay, we are going to have more, he said more Gena. So we were going to kind of end it here, but we'll keep it going a little while longer. So you wrote an article called, I just read it today, and I've heard you deliver lectures in the on this type of topic, building or the quest for psychological perfection. And there's like 3 archetypes. There's like the drill sergeant, and these archetypes being like your inner sort of inner archetype, like who's sort of, I guess. Okay, well, I'll let you explain what these archetypes are, but the role they play. But
I'd love to hear you do it.
I'll try to do it.
Take some of the load off.
I'll try to do it, and then I'll see what you think. But there's the drill sergeant, and then his sort of the other side of that dichotomy, the other side of that coin is the Zen master, the sort of Zen master that says, don't worry about a thing. But then the correct answer, the good one, is the builder who is building something perfect, and what perfect means we'll get into. So I guess what I was sort of grappling with was these archetypes are like who's sort of in your mind sort of telling you how to operate. So the drill sergeant is saying it's not good enough, it's never good enough. Keep, just push yourself, like you're like duty bound, and maybe there's kind of like an egoistic sort of premise, but still it's like you're never, it's never time to pat yourself on the back, or just it's never good enough. The opposite side is the Zen master inside of your head saying, like I said, it's fine, everything's going to be great. And the builder, now that's your contribution to this trichotomy. That's the one that you're offering. Okay, so what's your response to all of that? Did I just really hit it all on the head and we can wrap it there, or what do you think?
You did great. This is such a pleasure just to sit back and hear it so nicely essentialized. Yeah, and so dream. Indeed it is. And so what's left for me to say, I guess, to connect it back to our theme today, it sounds like we want to talk about perfection, whether this is an elusive concept, whether it's a worthy one to strive for. And the way that the trichotomy, to my mind, helps us clarify the perfection question is, I mean, in a really big way, I think it changes how we relate to and define perfection, what we even mean, right, by the term. And of course, I mean, we need more context even to decide, like, what is it we're trying to perfect? But if by perfection we mean self-perfection, moral perfection, the perfection of our own character, of our own well-being, of our own actions, choices, right? Like being perfect, like what is that? In our culture, I think it just carries toxic connotations, partly because of the ways it's been hijacked by the drill sergeant, that there's this platonic form of perfection where you're living some very kind of conventional cookie cutter version of a virtuous life or of a successful career, as defined by whatever impersonal conventions are being foisted upon you without real concern for your psychological needs, for what's going to fulfill you, make you happy, add up to a life fully lived for you, in the context of whatever your strengths and weaknesses, dispositions, values, etc. Right. And so if we dispense with that conception of being perfect, because I mean, we can talk about all of the things wrong with it, but try to bake some of the criticism into the description, right? Then I think the cultural answer tends to be stop being so perfectionistic, right? That perfectionism, which is a term for a pathology, right? For like a pathological approach to judging ourselves, setting goals, it's equated with perfection, the seeking of perfection as such. And we're counseled against getting too ambitious on either front, right? Like any conception of, yes, I'm trying to achieve this ideal and I'm trying to really fully achieve it, not just, approximate it, but I actually really want the whole thing. Like I want to be perfect. I don't just want to be a little bit better, or to I don't want to just be limping. I don't want to just, sure, there's this kind of self-improvement, craze in our culture, but it's not enough for me to always be getting better. Like I actually want to be striving for some sort of ideal, right? That generally just, it sounds like a recipe for disaster, I think, in our culture. And I think rightly so, given how easily it gets hijacked by the drill sergeant, right? And given how easily it just becomes a kind of source of self-censure and self-oppression, self-punishment, and doesn't actually get us any closer to the very, very difficult work of approaching that sort of ideal, but rather just bears down on us in the form of anxiety and guilt and shame and procrastination, right? And so what, if any, is the valid conception of a moral ideal that we can fully embrace, right? Like fully uncompromisingly hold ourselves to? And I think that objectivism provides one. And I think that there's a lot of psychological nuance in how we hold that ideal so that it is something we're trying to build, right? So on this builder's mindset that I've been on about, right? It's something that we can hold up for ourselves as a guide, as a horizon, right? As a standard worth reaching for. And we can identify cases. We can identify not just fictional, but real life examples. And for me, that's been really crucial. Like there are a few people I know, and I mentioned this, I think, in the article. There are a few people I know who I would say like they've pretty much got it. And they don't look the way that any conventional, standard of perfection might lead us to expect. Like they make tons of mistakes, they get things wrong, they're not omniscient, they're not infallible, right? They struggle, they have bad days. And there's something qualitatively different about the values they've internalized and how they've internalized them, like their day-to-day psychological functioning, such that it's not neurotic. Like by and large, they're on like consistent, deeply internalized, healthy premises. And you can see it in how they respond to failures and setbacks. You can see it in how they're able to zoom out and take perspective. You can see it in how they just flinchingly reject any sort of duty that isn't connected to their own, well-being and their own selfish needs. How they're able to love and be open and vulnerable with, other people in their lives. And I think that's an ideal we're striving for ourselves. And in a form that actually serves us and that is achievable for us, given where we're at in life and given what we care about.
Yeah, this sort of kind of like God as the standard, you know, when you mentioned like the Plato in early on in your answer, like I was thinking like this is an ongoing, I don't know if the word is pathology. This like came up in another podcast I did the other day, the word pathology. So maybe you can tell me, am I using the word pathology right when I say I pathologically I don't know, like overgeneralize or whatever? Is that the correct usage of the word? Does pathology mean you can't help it, or just that you do it often?
Oh, that's interesting.
Mhm.
I don't think either of those would have been at least my go-to definitional criterion, although I don't think that they're unrelated. I guess when I think of pathology, I think of something that isn't working right, something that's at least a little bit broken. Or, I mean, I think it's easiest to think of it by analogy to what it's in fact being analogized to, which is physical health and physical pathology, right? So like the flu is a pathology, diabetes is a pathology. Why are they pathologies? Because they're aberrations from normal healthy functioning, right? And they're aberrations partly because they cause real problems for us, right? Like they make it harder to move about and to think and to live a flourishing life when they're present, when they're active in us. And so pathology and sickness are more or less not homonyms, synonyms, synonymous, right? It's a sickness. So now we can vary in the extent of our control over such sicknesses and the extent of, what was the other thing you said? Whether we control it and
or just do it often, like
and the
like
frequency. Sure. Yeah. So it can be a sickness that only shows up a couple times a year. Like it can be an allergy that gets activated in certain climates, and we don't often have to deal with it if we just stay out of those climates, right? Or it can be something that we're suffering constantly and and severely. So I would say a pathology can vary widely on both of those dimensions, and it's important where it falls, those dimensions, right? But the key is that it's something that isn't working right.
Okay. Yeah, I affiliated in my mind with with behavior because of the phrase a pathological liar, but it could just mean something's not working right, it sounds like. So yeah, so like this God as the standard, like this impossibly flawless and perfect, but not the word perfect as derived from anything in reality. Like that's kind of a premise that people have. I mean, we see it in the history of philosophy. Even many philosophers who reject religion explicitly, they reject the existence of God, but to them knowledge is still what they mean by knowledge is certainty that is on a godly level. So for that reason, they kind of end up rejecting knowledge altogether. And people, I think we do this on an individualistic level if we don't have a better philosophy and we're not actively correcting these errors. So like, let's say somebody gets a certain degree of self-esteem or something positive from like being found attractive, and maybe at first they feel guilty about it. They're like, oh, that's secondhanded. And then they hear one of your lectures and they're like, okay, it's not necessarily so. It's visibility, and it's and it's a value, and it's it's something you kind of earned. You earned it by being the person you are and by not embarrassing yourself early on. So but then the same person is kind of like, okay, so this person finds me attractive, and also this other person finds me attractive, but there's like 8 billion other people that don't find me attractive. So it's like, it's either all or nothing. Like if there's anyone out there that's not into me, if I'm not for all these people, then I'm basically just a goon. Like, like this is kind of like the mental leap that some people might make. I don't know who these people are, but maybe this is relatable.
Asking for a friend.
But this is like God as the standard, or like omniscience, everything, like the whole universe is one giant like godly dimension,
like
and
judge and jury,
exactly right. Yeah. So
interesting.
Yeah. So that's kind of like so that kind of Platonic approach is kind of like more the drill sergeant.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean,
Um,
that's a really
mhm,
interesting example you're giving, because there's so much I could imagine being at play for any given person who falls into that particular line of thinking that you just described. And I
yeah.
like dealing with, particulars, because I think, we can understand
Mhm.
the principle a lot better by working it out in the context of particulars. And that's a really juicy particular. So, I mean, if a person feels like they're not, that like something is wrong with them, or they're falling short because not everyone likes them the same, right? Or because they have uh, enemies, or because they just generally, like they get rejected a lot, right? Or the right people don't like them or respond to them, or they feel like, well, sure, these people like me, but these people are also broken. And so I'm just riffing on, different ways I've seen this manifest for people. And I could imagine a whole bunch of different issues being at play there, and not all of them would cleanly map onto the drill sergeant mindset, though I think at least some would. But I could see, for example, just like very innocent errors of reasoning. Like when you mentioned, there's this all or nothing, like everyone likes me or no one does, like there are inferences that you're making, right? There are generalizations you're making from, okay, well, this person got bored of me or gave me this negative feedback, and so everyone like them is also off limits to me. Let's say it's someone who you respect, you admire, you really genuinely want those kinds of people in your network. You want to connect with people like that, and this particular one just like dismissed you without a hearing. And so you overgeneralize and think, okay, well, so then that echelon of people is just closed off to me, right? And that might just be false inference, right? Like, because maybe that particular person was having a bad day, or has something against, like your kind of haircut, or just like some particular prejudice that disposed them against what you were saying, right? And so there's that kind of issue at play potentially. There's also the larger question of what's your standard here, and like for what and for whom do you need to be liked by all, right? Like what's actually been driving that, and like ultimately what purpose, what values is it connected to? Like, is it because you want to build a really big following, and that's part of what's going to enable the kind of career you want? Is it that you want to be able to take your pick of romantic part? Like what's actually going on there, right? So I would also want to understand, and that's where the drill sergeant mindset could be kind of pushing us toward this really this like generic and non-causal standard of value, right? Like the standard is just, I must be loved by all, as opposed to, if I want X kind of life, or if I want to achieve X kinds of values, then I must enact Y kinds of causes in order to make that happen, right? So the builder is also, thinks causally, like if I want to build this, what do I need? What materials do I need? And how do I need to put them together? And what do I need to study up on? And who do I need to hire in order to make possible this desired outcome?
Yeah. So yeah, sort of exploring the topic of like romance and attractiveness is interesting, kind of to kind of blend with this. But now, like, looking at it in terms of like career and work, there's job interviews, there's all types of career goals and hopes people have where they're often going to get rejected. Definitely, when I mentioned my acting teacher, I mean, he was talking to a room of people, most of whom like acting is their primary goal, and there's a lot of rejection. And his main message to us was like, the goal is to go into an audition. You're going to be nervous, like that's never going to go away, but to really just be as confident as you can be. And they're really not even looking to see how good you act, because most people on TV are not even really acting. They're just kind of talking. They're just kind of like reading the script. You watch TV, there's like usually one character actor, and like 90% of the people on TV, they're just, yeah, like you'll
Wow.
start noticing this now. Most of them, they're just kind of playing themselves. They really just, so the people casting actors, they really just want to see how comfortable you are and if you're easy to get along with and to work with.
Hmm. That's
So it's
fascinating.
really, so
Mhm.
confidence at the end of the day is sort of the goal of most things. Now I can understand, let's say, if you want to send rockets to the moon, that's not about, it's about confidence, but it's about a lot more than that. You really have to get that job done. But in sort of arenas. Like confidence is a way to sort of to get there. And I guess earning confidence comes from, first off, getting up and pursuing something. That's a huge part. And there's the builder. So until you actually get up and do something, until you get that experience, until you get that very like tangible evidence and proof that you're good enough, that you're able to give it an honest effort, you're always going to probably be contending, dealing with the drill sergeant or the Zen master or some other crazy voices in your head, because you're living in the world of hypotheticals. So really, experience is something you really need to get. So that's a big part of it. And then you gain confidence, and the rich get richer, as people say when they're usually disparaging capitalism. The rich get richer, and I think that's true in many arenas of life. The more confident you get, then the more confidence you build. And meanwhile, the guy
virtuous cycle.
Yes, and the people who never made that initial effort, or they haven't done it yet, or they've been sort of kicking it down the road for so long, they get envious, and they're like, "Oh, you've had it all handed to you. You're already rich, and you're getting richer, and not necessarily in money, but just like you're getting more than you already have. But it's because you went out and pursued it to begin with."
Yeah, I think there's something really profound about kind of what you're saying, that insofar as like perfection, like life itself, which is a process. It's a process of self-sustaining action. To be alive is to be engaged in activity, right? And to perfect that activity, which is what psychological perfection amounts to, right, is to be engaged in certain kinds of activity in a certain way, right? And so I would say perfection is fundamentally about, or I don't know if fundamentally, but a really profound aspect and symptom, if you will, of, okay, well, how close am I to perfecting my psychology for purposes of the life I want to live? It's, you gauge it by how you approach things, and by the extent to which you're on a growth trajectory, the extent to which you are challenging yourself and trying things out. And part of what that will look like is that you're getting rejected, and you're failing a lot, and you're noticing blind spots that you didn't know you had until, but by definition, right, they are blind spots until you notice them. And there are new ones that you notice each time, because you're constantly pushing yourself further, and you're trying to reach that next destination and that next level of mastery, or you're exploring the next frontier that's exciting and interesting and new for you, partly because you haven't already mastered it, right? Like, you're really engaged in living. And that looks so different from the way that I think people conventionally think of perfection, which is almost like a static state of, I am either a perfect Buddha or a perfect Platonic form that needn't act or move, right? Because I have achieved this magical final state. Like, by definition, that's death, right? By that definition, the only kind of perfection is death.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this stuff goes on forever, right? Like, that's like a line from Curb Your Enthusiasm. You ever watch, as a psychologist, you must enjoy Larry David and all these neurotics, but he's in a therapist office, and he sees, I think, Rob Reiner or maybe Robert Redford, some bearded, bald old man who's big in Hollywood. And he's talking to Larry David, and they're just kind of like, "What are we even doing here? Like therapy? Like, I've been here for years." And Redford goes, "Yeah, this stuff goes on forever. Like, you're never going to reach that state where you're just like, okay, I'm good." Now, in reality, when it comes to therapy, there are definitely times when the patient and the counselor agree, "Hey, now's a good time to take a break, or even to retire for you and see how things go." But in general, life is graduate for now and see how it goes. But life itself, it sort of goes on, and the work never ends. So a lot of people, they bring this up as like a negative, like, what's the point of life? Like, you'll never reach that state. But here again, objectivism offers that, like, the underlying state is kind of what makes it good, like what desirable, like self-esteem, happiness. Yeah.
I mean, if we cash out the objectivist insight that life is an end in itself, and actually think about what that means and think about the answer that it offers to all those kinds of existential and neurotic doubts and worries about like, well, what's the point given that it will end someday? Well, unless you're looking to something that's supposed to happen after the end, the point is to live it, right? What do you mean, what's the point? You know, if anything, and I think there are lots of nice fictional portrayals of like, even like It's a Wonderful Life, which I saw many, many years ago, but I think this is part of the point, but that like there's that this is the point, right? That the purpose of life is to live it, and that looking to some further meaning, looking to some outside justification for existence, it misses the point, which is I have existence, and I have this temporary spark of it to do with as I please, right? And as I decide and as I choose by the work that I do. Like, how magnificent is that, right? That it ends someday makes it, if anything, I think, more magnificent, right? It's a scarce resource. It's a precious resource. Don't waste it. Versus,
oh yeah,
well, what's the point when it'll all end someday?
right. And if it were eternal, then like what difference does that really make? Or it makes it less valuable. But I saw like the first half of It's a Wonderful Life when I was a kid. That I don't think I've ever actually seen the end of it. I've heard it summarized, so I know how it goes. But I just remember the main character, like the first scene of him as an adult. He's like in the boardroom or in the office saying something like, "I want it big." That's like his opening line. "I want it big," and that's a line that I think every time I'm like looking at analytics or in any way looking at kind of numbers and I'm like, I want it big. So I really like that, even though that movie ultimately has kind of an altruistic lesson. The depiction of but the depiction of that character, I think, says something positive about the world, so or the culture at the time or whatever. We can go on and on. Let's jump over to the super chat before we run out of time. It's Apollo Zeus with a happy face and £5. Then Apollo Zeus with 5 more pounds says, how much is self-esteem a barometer in psychological health?
I mean, it's definitely an important aspect of psychological health. And so I would say it's a decent barometer. It's not, it's not the whole of it, but I mean, to answer this question, I would want to make sure we're also on the same page about what we mean by self-esteem and how you would assess or, how you would gauge your self-esteem. If you're going to use it as a barometer, A, a barometer for what, right? And B, as measured how. And I would say, I mean, a lot of what we've been talking about, you were talking about confidence, right? You were talking about how it gets built up over time through experience, and you can't really kind of, skip over the pain and rejection and and beginner's mindset, as psychologists sometimes call it, and kind of get over the hump to now I've mastered this or that domain, but that there's a fundamental underlying confidence that allows us to go through that process, and that supports us through all these iterations of being a beginner again or doing things that are uncertain. And I taught a whole course on self-esteem many, many years ago. One of the fictional portrayals that I find really clarifying, that kind of focuses the concept for me, is when Rourke talks about things only going down to a certain point, right? And that underneath that, there's only this knowledge, this conviction that, he's the man who designed, I don't remember even the exact moment in the book, right? But that I am capable of having built this and that I built it. And even the fact that now it's been, mutilated and I screwed up and didn't ask to sign a contract ahead of time. And and I don't even know if I'm ever going to build again. And all of this is so painful. But at the end of the day, there's this fundamental conviction that I, am capable of living my life my way and that it's worth it. And so that kind of deep internalized conviction is a pretty decent barometer. And I'd say to the extent that we're missing some part of it, and it does, I think it has very tightly interwoven parts, but still those parts, you can sort of differ on the extent to which you need work on, the capability kind of aspect or the worth aspect, and they go hand in hand, but sometimes they can be somewhat dissociable. To the extent that you've got those squared away, and I'd say also what's less explicit in the objectivist definitions of self-esteem, but is just as maybe even more critical, is just the sense of agency, the sense that, it's implied in the I'm capable, right? But like capable of what? Like I'm capable of figuring things out. I'm capable of learning, of growing, of taking charge, taking control, of directing my life, which implies also that the world is a certain way such that you can make things happen in it, such that you can find values in it. You can find, the people and the work and the activities, the resources that are going to make your life worth living. All that contributes to that deep fundamental conviction. Yeah, and I would say that it's definitely really key and something that people can work on over time.
Mm-hmm. I think like self-esteem, it's kind of similar to trying to attract a mate, in that like the harder you're trying to capture something,
Everything
the harder
goes
it
back to
becomes.
this theme for you.
I think business, like business and the sort of dating romance game have some very big parallels. I know people who they're great at one but bad at the other. Like let's say when they meet the opposite sex, they are like in their zone, super comfortable. But then in business negotiations, they just completely fold and they're really insecure, or vice versa. Some people great in business, but they're challenged by meeting somebody they find attractive.
But
so
I
there are
interrupted,
definitely
so go on.
no, that's okay. It gave me an opportunity to go on a tangent. But
Always a pleasure.
but the harder you try, I think the harder you try to capture something like that, it's sort of it's obvious, it's transparent. The person you're trying to capture, they're sort of put off by that. They sense it. But when you're confident, when you're when you're enjoying life, when you're a builder, like people tend to gravitate to you. And this is true in business and in various other ways. So again, the rich get richer. So the person with the most options, the person who's got more options than they can even handle, and like there's not enough hours in the day for them to exhaust all their potential, that's the person that like people want to work with, or they want to date, whatever it is. And again, the person who just hasn't succeeded yet, or hasn't, even worse yet, hasn't tried yet to succeed, hasn't begun to build, they get envious because they think the odds are stacked in favor of the person that's succeeding. So self-esteem, I think, is kind of like the more in my sort of perspective, and I don't know if this is exactly how objectivism would say it, but the harder you make self-esteem like your goal, the more of a distraction that really is. And getting nods of yes, which in most cultures say yes. There's like, I think Serbia or Croatia or something where this means no.
No.
So not
Just
where
gets
you're
too
from,
confusing.
Yeah.
Thankfully, for me at least, that would just be a layer of complexity. Yes. Yeah. I mean, so I think it's tricky because there is definitely a real sense in which making self-esteem your goal can backfire in really big ways. And I think part of the question of, are you doing that in a way that's going to backfire? It has to do with kind of how you're thinking about the goal and the outcome to begin with. Like, are you doing something that in a very subtle way amounts to trying to reverse cause and effect, right? Because the fact is that self-esteem, it's a downstream effect of a lot of built up data, a lot of experience, right? Like we were saying before, a lot of accumulated experience of being capable and of life being worth it, right? And if we're lucky, if all goes well in our formative early years, as toddlers, I was telling you before we went live about my almost 3-year-old toddler and the very hard time she's been having around the end of Christmas break and having to go back to school and regulating her emotions, and how much I feel like I'm learning as an expert in emotions and emotion regulation. She's like, good God, when you see it in the raw form of toddlerhood. In any case, speaking of tangents, if we're lucky enough and we internalize those experiences of our own agency, our own efficacy, of our own worth early on, we may never have to worry that much about our self-esteem because it's sort of, it's in place. And, as long as we keep making good choices, as we say to the toddler, as long as we continue on that active and thoughtful and rationally selfish trajectory, like we're going to be okay. And it sort of never needs to be a focus. And it probably doesn't make sense to shine too much of a kind of explicit light on it. On the other hand, if we grow up with deficits in our self-esteem, and it's probably more the rule than the exception that we at least have certain deficits in our self-esteem, given parenting is really hard, given our culture, given everything that makes that a really exacting achievement, we're going to have to think about it a little bit. And the question is how we think about it and where we place it sort of in our hierarchy. Are we thinking of it as this, my end goal is to have good self-esteem? Or are we thinking of it as my end goal is a life fully joyfully lived? And part of what I'm going to need is I'm going to need to gain a lot of confidence, and I'm going to need to be more selfish about what I say yes and what I say no to. And that's going to be really hard for me because I'm going to have this internal, voice of doubt and censure and, drill sergeant-esque kind of punishment that says either, no, you don't deserve to, be taken seriously by this person. You don't just, you haven't earned the right to assert your own needs and to say no, or to, you're going to be so humiliated if you like take this risk that you might as well just not bother. And we're going to have to push against those voices. And that's actually going to get easier with time because my sense of agency, efficacy, worth can actually change and grow with experience. And I have to really lean in to what I know, to what I understand explicitly through the philosophy that I've been studying and through my conscious reflection on the experiences I've had, that upon further consideration leads me to think actually I'm more capable than I often feel, or that I'm capable of learning at the very least, right? I can get better at things with practice. There's nothing about me that makes it impossible for me to learn and grow. And here are some examples of where I've already done that. We need to be able to very consciously talk to ourselves about those things and to leverage the knowledge that we have and to understand the resistances that we feel given the deficits in self-esteem that we've been dealt, if you will, or that we've grown up with. So in that sense, yeah, we have to work on our self-esteem, but what we're working on is our life, right? And our self-esteem is a crucial input and output of that process, but we can't sort of get so laser focused on, okay, I need my self-esteem to be good, that we forget the why and what for, right? Like then it's no longer a selfish endeavor, then it's an intrinsic duty to fix your self-esteem, which defeats
Right.
the whole.
So selfishness is the way, and a builder wants to build. So like Howard Rourke in The Fountainhead, even before the building is built, his employee says to him, like, what's the point of this if we know they're just going to ruin it once we're done? And he says something like, well, we'll know it was the way we built it, something like that. It's just the desire to build something is sort of, we all have our version of it. Some cases it's actual construction. Other times it can be writing a written piece. It can be a number of different things. So a lot of people they were inspired by the vision of musicians playing on the sinking Titanic. Like that's how they wanted to spend their final moments. And that's a beautiful thing. All right. Got to get to these super chats. Shazbot with $9.99 says, what importance do role models have in improving our psychology?
Huge importance. Yeah. I mean, this kind of speaks to what I was referencing before and that I mentioned in the article, right? Like a big part of what's grounded my conception of the ideal of the perfection I seek is having access to people, both real and fictionalized, and crucially, not just the fictionalized ones, because you only get so much from, a selective recreation of reality, right? Like you've got to actually be able to see many different examples in many different contexts, and you've got to see it in the full kind of messiness and complexity of life. And so being able to identify and really and learn about and engage with the people who represent at least aspects of the ideal too. It doesn't have to be like, this one person has it all because you can diversify your role models for maximum potency, where there are certain people who really exemplify that growth mindset that you're trying to develop, right? There are certain people who exemplify, what I've been calling self-honesty, right? Like this virtue of it's like at the intersection of the objectivist virtues of honesty and rationality, but with a real focus on being very kind of deliberately, purposefully honest with ourselves. And there are certain people who, for me, have really embodied that virtue in a way that's allowed me both to understand it and articulate it and to actually internalize it. And I do sometimes, and especially along the way when I've been practicing it and it hasn't been totally second nature to me yet, it was really key to be able to say, like, what would, person X think or do? So yeah, I think it's really, really valuable.
Marilyn with $4, thank you for that. Marilyn with $2.99, thank you for that. Jonathan Honig with $1.99, but he still did not spell your name correctly, so he is still in debt.
Come on, get on it.
Marilyn with $2
I forgive
says,
you.
some things can only be forgiven when they are corrected. Marilyn with $2 says, Gena, would you say perfection is a process?
So, I mean, I think we've spoken to that a little bit, but I think insofar as everything in life, right, is a process, insofar as, again, and I think this is where part of the drill sergeant Zen master dichotomy that I'm trying to push back on is this idea that either we have to think of things in terms of process or in terms of outcome, where life is really, it's a constant interplay of both, right? Like, we're not in some Heraclitean flux where where there's like no fixed or solid identity and there's only becoming and you never finish becoming. Like, there's a sense in which I am who I am today, right? And I love the things and the people I love, and I've built the things I've built, and other things I'm still working on building, and they're not complete, right? Like, there's such a thing as a finished building, a finished monument, and there's such a thing as, a building that's still very much in progress or under construction. So there's a sense in which I think, we could get carried away with the idea that, like, it's just always a process and there's no tangible kind of end goals or outcomes for us to aspire for, or to kind of to sink our teeth into, because that misses something important, right? Like, there's such a thing as, okay, I've achieved this. And I think that there's an equivalent of that psychologically where, like, I've basically achieved a habit of self-honesty. Like, it is now a virtuous habit where that's now my default, and it didn't used to be. And now that still breaks down to processes. Like, that means that, when called upon to grapple with something that's sort of painful or uncomfortable, but important, in reality, I err on the side of doing that rather than not doing that. Or, there are certain evasions that I used to be prone to and I'm not so much anymore, or I catch myself faster. So, like, the outcome still gets cashed out in the form of things that happen or don't happen, but it's also an outcome in that now I'm in a different kind of steady state than I was before, when my default and where my habit was in certain contexts to start BSing myself or to start making excuses. And as a result, like, there are things that didn't get done that now get done. And there are achievements that I've been able to achieve. Now I'm happily married and I have a kid. Those are outcomes, right? The kid went from not existing to existing. Like, that's not just process, right? That's a change in outcome right there. And I have a career that I love. So yeah, so I would say it's always both. And there's only so much value in trying to, like, do any kind of hard separation between process and outcome in the way that we sometimes see.
Yeah. Like the same way that at one point your child can't, like, I don't know, cook a meal or get dressed or whatever it is, or drive a car, and eventually we'll be an adult that can do these things without even really thinking about it. And we all do things every day that at one point we could not do. So that's kind of what it sort of, I guess, like, moral character sort of becomes through repetition and all of that. So
yeah, and that doesn't mean until that your sort of self-assessment has to be dichotomous in the way of someone who is holding themselves to an outcome detached from the causal process of getting there. because I think that's often the way that people with an outcome focus go wrong, where like, until I have tenure as an academic, or like until I'm happily married, I'm a failure at love. Like, there's a whole process you have to go through, and it's a messy, complex process, and there are lots of virtues involved in that process that even get you through it in the first place, right? And of course, there are lots of variables that are going to be somewhat random or beyond your control that also need to get kind of modeled into your self-assessment. And so it's not the case that you have to have already achieved every desirable outcome before you can love yourself, right? Or before you can be basically sort of happy and proud and fulfilled. It's just, it is worth distinguishing between outcomes you've achieved and outcomes you're still working toward, right? Which is a different thing.
Absolutely. Nick Bruno sent over $10. Thank you for that. All right, everybody, leave a like on the video on YouTube. The Quest for Psychological Perfection is the name of the essay. Let's link to that in the description or the chat room or whatever it is. Gena Gorlin is the guest. Everybody likes Gena Gorlin. Gena wanted me to ask all of you. Gena asked me, it's important to her. Everybody leave a super thanks, leave us a few dollars. Let us know how much you support the network. And everyone, leave a comment on the video. It's good for engagement. Leave a like, hit that join button to become a member. We got all types of perks, exclusive content, stuff like that. It's just, this is just really good stuff. Every time I read something related to psychology or we have this type of conversation, I think like I should do this more often. And then, but it's one of these things. It's like when you're doing it, you realize how important it is, and then you forget to do it as often. So
one of the great challenges of
New Year's resolutions,
self-regulation. Exactly. Are in season. Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Any final words about New Year's resolutions that you can leave us with?
I mean, go into them knowing what Rucka has just lamented, that it's always harder than it sounds, and that's worth planning for, right? And mean them, take them seriously. Don't just, I used to have really long lists of New Year's resolutions, and every year I would go back to them. So at least that's something, I wouldn't just leave them completely kind of trailing the dust. But when I would come back to them, of course, there would be a lot more that I would have to, defer to next year than consider basically achieved or at least updated in some way. And I think a part of that was that I wasn't taking very seriously what I was promising myself, right? Like, yeah, sure, I'm going to suddenly go from 0 to 100 on these 10 different goals. And I had this kind of superstitious, preoccupation with like, it needs to be 10 for no good reason that I could even name at the time. But like, that clearly was just too many to take seriously. And, of course, it'll differ by person, and it'll differ by kind of how you're trying to leverage that moment of self-reflection, but be selfish and make it what you really want and need it to be. Use it as an opportunity, as an invitation to selfishness.
Yeah, this comedian Adam Carolla, he said, my New Year's resolution is that everyone else needs to get their act together.
Yes, now I can sign on to that.
I say, like,
love it.
My New Year's resolution is to keep doing what I'm already doing. I'm in the gym thrice weekly with a trainer. I'm doing all types of great things.
Nice.
There's the resolution.
That's awesome.
Jeff Bannister sent over $10 Canadian. Marilyn with 99 cents. Jay Khan with $19.99 American, and then Shazbot with $4.99 asks, okay, more questions. He goes, what brand of glasses is Gena wearing? They are sharp.
I can remember this. Wait, what? What is this? So what's that?
Gucci, I hope.
Yeah, no, don't count on it. much cheaper. Like it's. I think it was actually, the brand was called something along the lines of like 24-hour glasses, or not 24, or like overnight glasses, something like that. It's actually a very cheap brand, but it happened to have the color combination that I wanted. And I figured I lose them often enough, or, my toddler breaks them often enough, that I should just go for cheap and easily replaceable. But yeah, I actually really like these glasses, despite all that. So overnight glasses, I think that might be it.
All right,
Google
there
that.
it is.
See where it
24-hour overnight glasses, something like that. You all figure it out. Thank you all for these last minute super chats. Although Gena wanted you to leave a super thanks on the video,
Did
so
I?
you disappointed her. Yeah, remember you told me to tell them. Thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Gena. We went 55 minutes. Sorry to keep you away from all your
Well worth
excellent
it.
work. Yes, it
Well
is.
worth it.
All right, and
Pleasure.
we'll have you back soon, I hope. Happy New Year, everybody. And we'll be back tomorrow for the Daily Objective. And we got some upcoming content, I think. Here we go. 7 p.m. UK time in just 5 minutes. It's the Fountainhead Book Club with Shoshana Milgram for ARCUK members. The session will also be live streamed to YouTube members, link in the chat. So everybody become a member immediately. And let's get out there and build. Thank you all.
Couldn't have put it better. Amen to that.
Thank you.
Happy New Year.
Amen. Happy New Year and goodbye.